Alright, the unexpected third part of my Shin Megami Tensei 4 review. This is going to be covering all the DLC bonus bosses, all 5 of them. I really wasn't planning on getting this after I beat the game, but as they went down in price, I kind of just purchased them on a whim. So, it originally I was gonna try and I was figuring out what, or I was trying to think of what to do for rating these, because if you guys watch my videos, you know I usually rate things out of 10 when I review them. So I was like, do I rate each piece of DLC individually, or do I just rate them all as a whole entire package? And then I just kind of came to the conclusion I can't really rate these because they're DLC. And I have an issue with that, mostly because if something's usually with full games, if something's reviewed kind of like on an average, or something's reviewed like negatively, usually if you want to still experience it, you'll get it used or you'll find it when it gets really cheap. With DLC, you can't really do that because it kind of you can't really borrow DLC. You can't really get DLC used. There's sales, but they're kind of few and far between. So I'm just gonna go with the flat out get this if you like so and so and so and so, or don't get this if you don't like so and so and so and so. So no out of 10 rating for this one. Just recommendations or just me telling you to stay away. So if you're wondering which DLC I'm reviewing, the list is Clipped Wings 1, Clipped Wings 2, Ancient One of the Sun, The Eternal Youth, and For the Past, For the Future. These are what make these DLC different than the rest is they have the little red text in the description that say this DLC or adds on to the story, which they really don't. They're mostly just bonus bosses, whereas all the other SMT4 DLC is either armor or really stupid side quests that are kind of like pay to win y. And honestly, that's kind of my biggest disappointment is they don't add on to the story in any major capacity. It's something. Honestly, these bosses could have been a thing where you activate the quest and you just fight them, and I honestly think I would have appreciated that better because the cutscenes and story stuff that comes with this, aside from Clipped Wings 1 and 2, you get an explanation for why the Archangels are the way they are when you meet them in SMT4. That's the biggest story stuff we get in this, really. All the other stuff is kind of dumb, and they kind of just add on to the story, but we already have enough closure in the main plot of the game itself that you don't really feel like you need it. And honestly, with all the cutscenes and story stuff, none of the dialogue is voiced, and the dialogue that is voiced, or they reuse sound clips from other voiced parts of the game if they need someone to say something. It's all just text, so I thought that was actually pretty funny. So you could tell they weren't really trying all too hard with the story stuff. So if you want this for story reasons, just look them up on YouTube. I'm telling you straight up, just it's not worth it buying just for the story stuff. The real reason to get this DLC is for the intense boss fights. Now I'm gonna start from the beginning here. So with Clipped Wings 1 and 2, they're kind of unique in that I feel like you can play Clipped Wings 2 before 1, as long as you're near the end of the game. That's the other thing I should mention. For where you should be when you take on these bonus bosses, you should have beaten the game or have a save right before the final boss. You should be like around level 80, level 90-ish, around there. Especially for the later fights, you're gonna need it. But honestly, Clipped Wings 2, I feel like you can do before 1, whereas all the other DLC fights, I feel like you kind of need to do them in order. Specifically, the final DLC boss, you pretty much need to have bought the other DLC in order to defeat him, which I find pretty hilarious. But for Clipped Wings, you fight the 4 Archangels. Clipped Wings 1 is pretty underwhelming. Both of the angels in that are really easy, especially because all the Archangels have weaknesses. And unlike the other bosses, if you exploit their weaknesses, they don't do anything about it. They just take it. So honestly, I thought Clipped Wings 1 was a little too easy. Actually, the in-game, when you buy the DLC, it says recommended time to use this or to play this DLC. For that one, it actually says like end game, so you're not supposed to have beaten the game. And I kind of feel like I would have enjoyed it if I was around that level, because then I would have had a more of a challenge. But with my party that could defeat the final boss in like 3 hits, the first 2 archangels didn't have. They weren't much of a challenge for my team. To the point where Raphael, I actually auto-battled to death. So, yeah. And then the demons you get from Clipped Wings 1, well, they're pretty powerful. Specifically Uriel, however you're supposed to say it. He actually has, he's probably the most broken demon in the game if you fuse him correctly with proper skills, which I don't really want to spoil in case you want to find that out on your own. But if you don't know what I'm talking about and you want to look it up, then just look up, I don't know, you should be able to find it if you type in Uriel Shin Megami Tensei 4 or whatever on Google. Raphael kind of sucks. So I guess moving on to Clipped Wings 2. This is weird because I feel like you fight Gabrielle and Michael in this. I feel like Gabrielle is tougher than Michael. I had more of an issue fighting her than I did Michael, specifically because she really likes status ailments, and it fucking sucks. Michael has this one attack that always does 666 damage, but if you use doping or if you have at least one healer on your team, that's not an issue. So I kind of thought that was weird because it feels like as soon as I got done with Gabrielle, like Michael was just a cakewalk for me. So I think they should have either rebalanced that or just switched the fights. But the demons you get from this, Gabrielle is okay, I guess. Good endgame demon. But Michael is actually really good. I used him for the rest of the DLC fights. He's a lot of fun, and then he has an ability which I actually demon whispered onto my main character that allows you to choose a demon in your party to just automatically smirk, and that is fucking awesome. It's a lot of fun. It kind of breaks the game, but the MP cost is a little heavier to balance it out. But I really enjoyed having Michael as a demon. And then also you do get that other attack that does 666 damage, which is pretty great, except you can't really fuse it onto any other demon if I recall correctly, because it's specific to Michael, so that was kind of disappointing. But if you're looking for DLC so you can pimp out your party, Michael is definitely worth it. And then I'm not sure if you get this after Clipped Wings 2, but I was under the impression just watching the cutscene you need to have beaten both Clipped Wings 1 and 2 for this to happen. You get a palette swap, or you unlock the ability to fuse a palette swap version of Asmodeus that learns Pierce whatever elemental, like Ice Pierce or Fire Pierce or whatever. So he's basically fusion fodder the demon, and I think that's pretty funny. It's really weird because I feel like there was a better way to go about doing that, like, because the demon himself is fairly useless. He has a really good gun skill, actually, which I used for, I put it on my main character during Demon Whisper. But I felt like we could have got something a little more with that, just either multiple demons to be used as fusion fodder, or if you were to just give us one demon that's actually good and not just fodder. Okay, moving on. This is where stuff starts to get pretty hard. Ancient One of the Sun. Actually, let me start this. I kind of feel like there's 3 tiers of this DLC. There's the Archangel stuff, and that's kind of the first tier. That's stuff we just talked about. Then there's Ancient of Days and Sanat Kumara. These are the tier 2 bonus bosses, and then there's the final DLC boss, which we'll get to. This is where it gets pretty hard, but I think there's kind of an odd, I don't want to say gimmick, but there's this, it's a situation where I feel like if you have a very powerful physical main character, Ancient of Days is going to fucking suck for you, whereas Sanat Kumara will be pretty easy. If you have a magically powered main character, Sanat Kumara will kick your ass, and Ancient of Days should be easy. At least that's kind of the impression I got playing it, and I've seen a few people reference that Sanat Kumara is kind of a pushover if you have Fizz. So I kind of just drew that conclusion on my own. But Ancient of Days is... First of all, I want to say for the plot of both of these, they're total excuse plots. Like, you literally get teleported somewhere else, and then problems come up that were never introduced in the main story, which is pretty weird. But Ancient of Days, I'll start with him. Really annoying to fight. Probably the DLC boss I died the most on. And then you unlock him for fusion. I don't really want to spoil much about the fight because I will admit it is very satisfying trying to figure out and build a team to defeat either of these bosses specifically. But when you unlock Ancient of Days for fusion, he has really good skills, except he has around 400 HP, and he's weak to force and electricity. And that's stupid. I mean, you could fuse him with Life Surge, and that kind of helps, but that really hampers his usage a lot. However, if you do have a magical-based main character, you're going to want to Demon Whisper one of Ancient of Days' skills, which allows you to triple the damage your next magical attack does. So that's pretty overpowered, but it's great. You'll love it. Now we have Sanat Kumara, who is pretty much the physical version of Ancient of Days. I didn't have much trouble with him. A lot of people seem to really, really, really struggle fighting this guy. I thought he was pretty easy, so I'm not sure what's up with that. Like I said before, I think if you have a physical main character with any type of gun skill, you're going to have an easy time. And he's a lot more useful than Ancient of Days is overall, especially kind of how Ancient of Days has that one skill that triples your next magic attack. Sanat Kumara has Dark Energy, which triples your next physical attack. So I loved that because I went physical my entire playthrough. So that was really nice to have. Overall, I really liked Sanat Kumara's boss fight and recruitable demon much more than Ancient of Days. Ancient of Days kind of falls into that thing that Gabrielle does where status effect spam really isn't fun to deal with. And a lot of times it feels like it just comes down to luck if you get hit by stuff or not. Sure, you can... There's a lot of different ways and different demons and such you can use to deal with it better than others. But at the end of the day, it's still... It's something where... Even more so than usual Shin Megami Tensei boss fights, I feel like it relies a little bit too heavily on luck, so that kind of disappointed me. And then we have the final DLC bonus boss, and probably one of the hardest Mega 10 bosses of all time, Masakado. Now, I have an issue with this in that Masakado is kind of like Demi-Fiend from Digital Devil Saga 1, except, well, here, I'll start with this. You need a very, very specific build to even hope of beating the Demi-Fiend in Digital Devil Saga 1. And even then, you're going to have a tough time. Now, Masakado, on the other hand, you need two specific builds in order to beat him. Or you can choose one or the other, with one being more heavily preferred, which involves Uriel, whatever. And that kind of bummed me out. Just the idea that this boss is so hard that you need to pretty much break the game and get all the other broken DLC demons in order to beat, or just to stand a chance, kind of depresses me. I wonder, I'm sure someone has, but I can't imagine it being fun or really that viable. Has anyone beaten Masakado without using the other DLC? Because I almost want to say it's a slim to zero chance that that's even possible. The other thing with Masakado is he's a timed fight, which I kind of appreciate because that I don't think there's any other boss in the game. Actually, Mega 10 doesn't have that in general a lot, so I kind of appreciate that they threw that in here, where you only have 10 different turns. to beat him, and that adds a whole new level of strategy to the fight that really interested me. But other than that, I kind of feel like it's so strict with how, like, what party setup you can use. Overall, the lack of flexibility just really bummed me out with that final boss fight, because no matter what awesome demons you created or what amazing party setup and stuff for your main character is pretty much going to be running support, and unless your demons are very specifically good at certain roles, they're not going to really be useful for this fight, and you're going to need to make your entire party up from scratch, which, I mean, that's a standard SMT thing. But I think it's a little ridiculous that there are so few demons that fill that role, especially because it highly encourages you to buy the DLC. That it's kind of a bummer. I feel like they should have toned it back a little bit and, allowed you to have used main game demons in order to beat them. Maybe require a little bit more grinding or a little bit more skill management to do that. But I think it's ridiculous that DLC is almost a requirement. And after you beat Masakado, you get Masakado's Shadow, which is probably the strongest demon in the game, to the point where he has an attack that just allows you to exploit weaknesses. Even if the enemy doesn't have a weakness, it still hits their weakness. Isn't that a mindfuck? So that's pretty fun to abuse. And then, if I recall correctly, I haven't done this yet, but I've read, at least, that you get a skill that's pretty much it pretty much just gives you more turns, which I find hilarious, because that's kind of the obvious broken ability in a game with the press turn system, is just something that gives you more turns. So that should be fun to mess around with. I haven't really gotten the chance to. I just beat him this morning, and by this morning I mean like 2 a.m, and it's like 6 p.m. while I'm recording this, so I haven't really messed around with doing all that and playing around with my new broken demon. But he seems a lot of fun to use. It's kind of interesting. This is kind of the average RPG thing, where you're at the point where to take down the bonus boss, you can already just completely demolish the final boss and all the other challenges. So when you get an incredibly broken reward for beating the bonus boss, it almost feels like you don't need the broken reward because you're already super powerful. Now, should you actually get this? Now, what I'll say is, if you enjoy bonus boss fights, or if you think you're going to enjoy bonus boss fights, start with Clipped Wings 1 and 2 and beat those. If you're digging it, buy the other 3. If you're not, just set them down. If you're not interested in bonus bosses or side content or any of that stuff at all, you can completely ignore these and be fine. If you're interested in story stuff, like I said, just look it up. It's not worth buying and experiencing firsthand. It really isn't. I almost am kind of upset that they marked it as story DLC, or because they do say in the description, like I said earlier, that it adds on to the story, and it really doesn't. It adds on to pointless plot threads that don't really need to be explored that much. And honestly, it's nothing interesting or nothing mind-blowing. So if you're looking for a hard bonus boss, intense fight thing, or maybe if you just want a little more SMT4 in your life, pick these up, or at least try Clipped Wings 1 and 2 and go from there.